fish, man. Keep falling. You know, I guess the chug bug has been around since I've been fishing for tournaments, at least 20 years, but it always was neat at chugging and it had some action, but it was really difficult for me to get the kind of action I like out of a topwater bait, which is a walk the dog type of action. And about 2 years ago, I was playing with it, trying to get the walk the dog and the spitting action out of that I like out of a little chugger. And I've started weighting baits. I drilled holes in them. I ruined a bunch of them, drilling holes in them, putting BBs in them, put lead worm sinkers in them. I put different sizes of hooks, and I finally came up with a combination just before in practice for the Bassmasters Classic at Logan Martin Lake 2 summers ago. I had got a couple of these baits working really, really well, and I'd caught so many big spotted bass on them practicing for that tournament, it was outrageous. And I have had the number of good days on this bait since then, and it's because we've changed the bait and added rattles, we've added the weight, and now Storm has it out in production, and it's one of the most exciting new topwater baits that I've seen come along in years, because it's got all the things the topwater bait needs. It'll walk the dog, or it'll spit, and it covers a wide range of fishing conditions.
Oh, look at that good boy, that's a good one, hit it. There he is, he got it that time. I think it's a white bass, maybe, or a striper. Not sure. No, it's not. It's a good largemouth. That's what a rattling chug bug will do for you right there. I like to throw a chug bug on about a 6.5 medium action rod, and I just use a standard retrieve ratio reel that casts real good, and I just throw that thing out there and let it set for a second, and then typically I like to use a kind of a pop, 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 kind of a walk the dog back and forth and make that thing chug. Sometimes just a steady chug will work, just pop, 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 and then sometimes I do it quick. I've seen the situation where you couldn't bring that bait fast enough and they'd still come up and hit it. But most of the time, just a standard back and forth. See how it kind of spits the water, and that rattle in there is really rattling? And that'll draw those fish up from real deep. Boy, they'll just come up and slam that thing.
Two things that I like in this topwater bait particularly. One is that it'll zigzag back and forth. We call it walking the dog. It goes right, left, right, left, right, left, in a rhythmic cadence. And for some reason, that right, left, walking the dog action triggers bass to bite. Golly! Yeah.
This one, go on that big old good one, son.
The other thing that the tail weighting in this bait will do that also is very attractive to bass to strike is it spits. It throws the water forward, and it's very reminiscent of a little shad or a little bass chasing a minnow, and it makes a sound very much like that little bass would do when he's chasing a bait fish. We call it a spit. And that's another thing that catches a lot of bass. And this bait will both walk, zigzag back and forth, and then it'll spit. It really attracts fish to it in a lot of different ways.
He's pulling drag.
Okay, the walking the dog is a matter of, you have to use a rod that's short enough that you can point it downward at the water, and your motion is a downward motion because it transfers that energy to the bait, but it's also extremely important that your rod tip come forward toward you and then back up, because you have to get the bait started moving and then throw it to slack so that can have the slack line to go back the other direction. So you jerk and push the line back at the bait. The spit, to make the bait spit, you have to almost hold your rod tip in an upward position and pull the bait on a tight line. And it depends on a little bit depends on where the bait is in position to the boat. If it's far out, if you make a long cast, you have to hold the rod tip up to get the spit. But as the cast progresses, if you want to maintain that spitting action, then you have to almost lower your rod tip to the side or down a little bit to get the same line angle to make the bait do the spit.
In the pre-fishing for the Bassmasters Classic on Logan Martin Lake, I caught every morning in the first 2 hours of daylight, I was catching 6 to 10 big spotted bass each morning on this. It's just a phenomenal bait. There's nothing else like it as far as topwater lures are concerned. The rattling chug bug is good around any type of cover. Clean banks, bushes, but one of my favorite targets is to fish it around laydowns or logs up near the shoreline. And I'll make a cast just past the laydown and let it sit, kind of let the ripples die away, and then I'll start working it back and forth.
Now there's a couple of different ways to tie on a rattling chug bug. The first one is you can tie direct, and you'll have 2 or 3 results from that. The first is, you'll notice here, this chug bug is tied direct. The knot is cinched down tight against the line tie. Okay, what that does is cause the lure to come back on a much more direct course, and you can fish it much, much faster. It does inhibit it from walking as well, but sometimes you want the bait to come back extremely fast, so you tie on direct. The other way to do it is a lot of things people prefer to do is use a Durasnap. This is an original chug bug that I've got tied on with a Durasnap. I use this Durasnap because it gives the bait much more freedom of movement. You can also accomplish this with a loop knot. But why I prefer the Durasnap is because if I'm pre-fishing for a tournament or experimenting with colors and I'm changing colors quite often, it's very easy, as you can see, to change lures without having to retie each time. You'll notice the side-to-side action of the nose of the bait and also the roll of the bait gives that flash underneath the surface of the water. What the purpose of tying direct is to make the bait come back in a much more direct course, which allows you to work the bait much, much faster. This is very effective on schooling fish, when the bass are chasing shad, and also on stripers and other types of schooling fish. You'll notice that we lose almost all of our side-to-side motion. We can actually just make the bait skip across the top of the water. And you can also really hear that rattle work. This is very, very effective technique when the fish are chasing shad because they think that's an escaping bait fish trying to get away from them, and it will very often trigger a violent strike. As you'll notice, I'm working the reel and the rod tip almost at the same speed, and I'm trying to take up as much line as possible with each turn of the reel handle. And you'll notice on this Garcia reel, this 6.3 to 1 gear ratio is almost a necessity for working the bait this fast.
The iridescent flash tail on this rattling chug bug is something that I think is a nice little added ingredient, because a lot of times the bass will chase or follow a topwater plug, and that little flash that tail gives the fish just another extra reason to eat the lure if they're kind of in a finicky mood. Now you and I both like fish that just come up and annihilate your topwater plug. Fish that are in that kind of aggressive feeding action, they don't really care about that, what kind of tail you have on there, but a lot of times when you're fishing, the bass are not very aggressive, and times like that is when that extra little flashy tail can come in handy. It gives the bass just enough reason to come up and eat it.
The rattle is part of the weight, and I think that there's times that I've seen that a rattle can be very important. And it is another sound attractant to cause the fish maybe to look up at the bait, and then once he sees the erratic action, he's going to hopefully going to go ahead and crash it. The rattles are as a part of the weight, and the rattle chamber is almost the whole length of the bait, so that when you jerk the bait forward, the BBs go from one end of the bait to the other and gives it a very loud rattle. The flash tail that we've added to this bait also is a unique part of it because it gives the bait a little more action. If you fish in a slow retrieve, a walk the dog retrieve, when you stop the bait, the tail continues to move around a little bit, and that flash that comes off of the flash tail gives a much more attractive flash to the bait, and I think causes fish a lot of times to bite it on a slower retrieve than it would without the flash tail.
A lot of times what we do here now is just chug this bait, just pop, 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 pop. Just a steady chug and let it spit water. Sometimes that's the retrieve they want. You just kind of got to experiment around and see how aggressive the fish is and let the fish kind of tell you what they want. But this is a bait that you can work at several different speeds, from real slow to real fast, and it can be very effective at any one of those speeds.
I am so excited about you having the opportunity to fish this new rattling chug bug. I can't tell you how many fish you're going to catch on this. You've got to try it for yourself, and that's what's good about fishing. You can do it, and this bait makes it easy to catch fish on a topwater. I tell you, this thunder stick is so good. You can catch them when you're not even trying to. Thunder stick is probably the reason that I'm most excited about storm bait. It's by far my favorite storm bait. It's the reason that I used storm baits in the first place, really, because it's such a unique bait. It looks like, on the surface, almost everybody else's minnow bait, or jerk bait we call it. But if you put the bait in the water and fish with it, it does better tricks. That's the basic reason for why I think the thunder stick's by far the best jerk bait out there. It's heavy, relatively heavy. It casts like a rock. It goes great distances. You can cast this bait into the wind even with bait casting equipment. But the best part about it is when you get it in the water, it incorporates a side-to-side motion in a walk-of-the-dog fashion, but under the water. And that is what triggers so many of the bass that we catch to bite, is that side-to-side motion. This bait, with this kind of action, with the jerk the rod in a rhythmic cadence, the bait will go back and forth in a zigzag motion. That's the key to why the thunder stick is the best jerk bait, because it does the side-to-side motion far better than any other bait on the market, and that is what gets the fish to bite. A jerk bait, like a thunder stick, is a reaction bait anyway. Fish don't just say, all right, there's a minnow, I'm going to go eat it. It is a reaction strike. The fish react to it. A bass is an opportunistic predator. He reacts to abnormalities within his prey, and this is a very abnormal, erratic prey minnow to a bass, and that's what triggers him to bite. And that's why a thunder stick's so good, because it has that side-to-side erratic motion. Like most topwater baits, a jerk bait works best with a 5.5 to 6.5 foot rod, depending a little bit on the height of the user, the fisherman. But it has to be short enough that you can make the downward thrust with the rod. The rod tip almost has to be pointed downward to get the maximum action from the bait, because it transfers, again, it gets your line in the best alignment with the bait and helps to pull the bait down. The farther you can get your rod tip down to the water, the deeper the bait will go, and the better the action will be, because you can transfer that jerk directly to the bait and yet give it the slack line that allows it to do the erratic back and forth motion. In the pre-spawn condition, which a jerk bait's extremely good bait before the bass goes into the spawning beds, I like real bright colors, orange bellies, hot tiger, or what I call blue thunder, which is a chartreuse insert blueback orange belly, real bright colors. This is one that I'm really high on. It's chrome chartreuse speck, orange belly. It's real bright color. As the spawn progresses and I go into summer, after post-spawn or on into summer, I tend to use more baits that are a little more subtle, a little more natural colors, like blue mackerel or a pearl's one of my favorites, just a plain pearl bait. It's very reminiscent of the shad, and it's not very bright color, but water's usually clear that time of year, so the natural colors are better, it seems to me, after spawning. So you want minnow baits, minnow colors, natural colors, and you want some real bright ones too for the pre-spawn. You don't know what's going to happen when you throw a thunder stick. You can catch every species of fish that swims with this. That's one of the reasons it's my favorite bait, but it catches a lot of big bass. You catch little bass, you catch big bass, you catch all kinds of fish on the thunder stick. It's by far my best jerk bait on the market.
The rattling flatwort is one of my favorite crankbaits. I like to use this lure in clear water situations and in tidal rivers. It's the bait that I used to help win the 1993 Bassmaster Pro-Am on the Potomac River. And I caught a number of my fish on this little bait. I was fishing it around rocky riprap type banks, and I was fishing it on about 10-pound line, and the bait will dive about 8 feet deep. Tidal river fish are notorious for liking a smaller size lure, and that's the other reason why I like to throw it in clear water, because it's not too bulky. I catch a lot of fish on this lure in clear water reservoirs. It's got a nice tight wiggle to it. The wiggle wart has a wider, more pronounced wobble. The flatwort has a tighter little wiggle to it, and I like that in the warmer water months of the summer and the fall, especially in clear water reservoirs. You can really hear how this rattling flatwort makes a lot of noise, and to me, that gets the fish's attention. And when they come up to it and see that nice tight wobbling action, they're going to eat it every time. A lot of times a stop and go retrieve will work well with a flatwort. Not just a steady retrieve, but kind of as you're bringing it in, pause every now and then. And a lot of times if a bass is chasing the crankbait and the bait stops right in front of him, he's got no other choice either than to move out of the way or to eat it. And that's why a lot of times I prefer that stop and go retrieve.
Here's the wiggle wart. This is one of my favorite crankbaits. I've been using this thing for years and years. It was introduced by Storm in 1975, and it's just been a super crankbait. And the guys on the tournament trail all fish them, and I've fished them for years. I, of course, live in Missouri on the White River Lakes, and any clear water, well, really they're good in any kind of water, any color water, but the clear water lakes up there where I live, these things have been tremendous ever since they were first introduced. It's got a wide wobble. It's a crawdad type action, and it really attracts fish to it. There's over 100 colors in the Storm line in this wiggle wart, and I tell you what, you can get just about any color you want. I like to throw the thing on about a medium heavy glass crankbait rod with 10 to 17 pound test line, depending on the situation. Standard 5-to-1 gear ratio reel seems to work the best for me, and boy, it's just such a great fish catcher. It has that good wide wobble, and it really looks like a crawdad. My favorite color is this crawdad color. I've done so well on that in the past, but there's so many good colors to choose from. Another one that I've caught an awful lot of fish on, you can see on this bait, I've caught a bunch of fish on that. You can see how beat up it is. That's the Hot Tiger. And boy, it is a great color in off-colored water, and sometimes in clear water and in cold water I do well on this color. Probably my two favorite colors right there, but they're shad colors, they're perch colors, there's every color you can think of under the sun in the line, and these are just wonderful baits for catching bass.
There's many, many ways to fish a wiggle wart, but I'm going to show you one of the favorite techniques of the pros for fishing around boathouses and docks. What we actually do is mistune this lure to either run right or left, depending on which side of the dock we want to fish. How we do that is, if we want the lure to run to the right, we actually take a pair of needle nose pliers and bend ever so slightly the line tie eye to the right, as such. That will cause the lure to run crooked, if you will, or run to the right. I'm going to actually make a cast down the right-hand side of this dock, and the lure will actually run underneath the dock. Now, of course, the lure only goes one direction, and it only goes right. Okay? Now, if we want to fish the other side, and we want to make it run left, we have a second wiggle wart already rigged up already bent to the left to run left. I can cast down that way, actually run it back underneath the dock.
One thing that makes a wiggle wart so good is it backs up when you stop it. A lot of times when you reel it down and you run into something, a log or a rock, instead of reeling it hard and hanging up, you can just stop the bait and let it back up, and it'll come right over it without getting hung up on it. And another thing, that's a lot of times that's when your bass is going to hit it. If you stop that bait and let it start coming back towards you, or when it just starts rising back up, is when that bass will run up there and take it. So it's real effective in that method. One of the methods I like to use fishing a wiggle wart is just paralleling the bank. What I'll try to do is determine what depth the fish are in. For instance, if they're in 5 or 6 foot, then I'll just get the boat in about 5 or 6 foot of water and just parallel, throw my cast ahead of me. And a lot of times I like to fish with the wind. You get that bait down there and you bounce it around off the rocks and off the bottom, and just give it erratic action, making it look like a crawfish. And it seems to be that's when you can really trigger the strike. And I do real well with this bait in most water conditions, except maybe real hot summer. The fall, the dead of winter, and the spring is great. I catch so many good fish on it in the spring. So if you'll add a wiggle wart to your tackle selection, you'll catch a lot of bass on it.
This is the kind of bait you want to have in your tackle box. This is one that's caught a lot of fish. This is the little short wart. It's exactly like the bait that was very key to me in winning the Bassmasters Classic. This bait is one of the baits that I always turn to when fishing's tough, but if the fish are shallow and fishing's tough, you know I'm a spinnerbait fisherman, right? I catch a lot of my fish on spinnerbaits, but spinnerbaits won't always catch the fish that are on shallow cover. And when an alternate is needed, this is the alternate that I go to, is short wart. It'll catch fish off those stumps and logs and laydowns and bushes and rocks. They're shallow, and they're tired of us looking at a spinnerbait saying, but this bait will get in there, get in and out of those rocks and things and bring the fish out on it. I have caught tons and tons of fish, including that $50,000 classic purse on this bait right here. The short wart is an extremely effective bait in shallow water. Storm makes short warts in 3 sizes. This is the bait that I used to win the Classic, a little larger size and a little larger size. These can be very critical in choosing the right size of short wart to match the size of the shad. I'll try to match, these are very important baits when bass are eating primarily shad. These match shad very closely in action and size if you use the right one. And so it's important to choose a bait that matches the size, match the hatch, so to speak, for the shad that are around in the area that you're trying to catch the bass. Each one of them has a rattle, which we found also to be very attractive to fish in the shallow water fishing conditions that we're going to use this bait in. So get you some of these in there, all the sizes, colors that match the shad, colors that match the bluegills that are around where you fish, and you'll catch fish in that shallow water. Even if they won't hit a spinnerbait, you can catch them on a short wart. This is an extremely good example of the kind of places that I catch fish on a short wart. It's a shallow pocket, has a lot of rocks on the shoreline, but in addition to that, it has stumps, so you can't see them, but they're under there. And that's what's really important about fishing a short wart. It's really neat to be able to hit something with it. And so that's one reason that shallow water is the best place to throw this thing. But shallow cover is where bass live, right? So you got stumps, rocks. What I want to do with this bait is cast it past a target if I can see one. There's a stump right there. Cast it right past that stump, reel it right up to the stump, and actually bump the stump. Sometimes I'll bump the stump and then stop the retrieve, and bam, he'll run out from under that stump and eat the bait. And even if you can't see a stump, I felt another one. There's another one right there. Throw right past it again and pull it right up to the target. Try to hit the bump, hit the stump, hit the rock, hit the bush, hit the target. And that causes the bait to change its speed, change its direction, and that erratic behaviors will trigger a fish to bite even if he really didn't intend to.
My favorite storm lure is a short wart. In fact, this is my favorite crankbait. It's just a bait that I really enjoy fishing. If it's a shallow runner, runs about 3 feet deep. I usually fish on fairly heavy line, 14 to 20 pound line. And I fish this bait right up on the shoreline, in and around heavy cover, laydowns, fallen trees, logs, stumps, places that you'd normally fish a spinnerbait. And I catch a lot of fish on this because I fish it in other areas that people won't throw a crankbait. You can't believe how way this bait comes through cover. Most crankbaits, as you know, will hang up a lot in a brush pile or in wooden cover. This little guy does not hang up. It's just amazing, especially if you fish with heavy line. As long as you don't work it too fast, just kind of slow roll it through the cover, and you can fish it. It's just it's like a weedless crankbait. My favorite color is the Hot Tiger. Reason being, this is a technique and a lure that I use in stained water most of the time. In real clear water, the bass won't hang around in shallow cover too much, and in the clear water, you're better off with a rattling chug bug. But this is a stained water lure. I would say if you could see 18 inches or less of visibility, this is the bait to throw, especially if you have a lot of cover and 2 or 3 feet of water. Now the way I fish this is real simple. Just here's a nice laydown, for example. I'll make a cast up off the end of the laydown, and I don't work it, real fast. I just have a good steady retrieve, and I'll just let the lure do all the work, and it'll kind of bounce through the limbs and deflect off the cover. I don't really use a stop and go retrieve as much because the lure is deflecting off cover and getting reflex strikes that way. But as you can see here in the water, it's got a real nice action to it. Now one other little tip about this short wart that most people overlook is when you're fishing them in real shallow water, one of the things I like to do is I'll make a cast by a piece of cover like this stick up, and I'll just, instead of starting to crank right away, I'll pause and I'll just let it sit there, and you can just kind of pull it under and it floats right back up, and I catch a lot of fish that way. The reason why the short wart is so weedless is because it has a lot of natural buoyancy. The square lip, the way it comes down and it angles in the water like that, that square lip hits the cover and deflects up, and the bait lifts up over the cover. And the third reason it's so weedless is because of the short shank hooks. You want to make sure you use short shank hooks on the Pro Series short wart. But again, one other thing, I mentioned the way the bait backs up in the water. If you look at it, I'll pull it under. When I pause, it doesn't just float straight up, it floats backwards. And it kind of backs away from cover.
This is one of my highest confidence baits because I know this will catch fish if they're in the position where it runs, 2 to 4 feet. That's why I use it in the Classic. I got on a little stretch of riprap that was loaded with fish. They were shallow, and I couldn't seem to get them to bite my spinnerbait on that condition, but they would pound this little short wart. And I caught a limit in about 10 minutes in the first day. That's one of the reasons I have confidence in this bait. It'll give you confidence too because it'll catch fish for you. It's a simple deal. You chunk it out there and wind it back, you'll catch fish on a short wart.
One of the reasons I like fishing the Magnum Wiggle Wart is because of the size. Size is real critical in tournament fishing right now. Most of your limits are down to 4, 5, or 6 fish. So I go out looking for big fish. And when I do, I always start with a Magnum Wiggle Wart. One of my favorite places to use a Magnum Wiggle Wart is around submerged vegetation. If you can see the bill here, the bill puts off such a tremendous amount of turbulence out in front of it that it will actually push the weeds away from it before it ever gets to it. So it really comes through hydrilla, milfoil, most underwater aquatic vegetation really well. And back to the size really helps you when you're trying to catch big fish, trying to locate a lot of big fish. It's just a large bait that fish don't have to work real hard for. And one of the things that I like to do is to make a long cast along a hydrilla line or creek channel, get it down to where it's touching the object that you're trying to fish, slow it down real slow, and just crank it really slow, make it bounce off the cover, come through the grass. When it does bounce off something, that's more than likely when you're going to get a strike. And when you're fishing vegetation, you'll actually feel the bait try to hang up in it, and then it will come off, and when it comes off, that's when the majority of the strikes occur. One of the keys to this Wiggle Wart, and one of the good things about it, is the actual weight and the ease of castability. with very little effort, you can throw that bait 60 to 80 feet, keep your bait in the water, keep your bait in the strike zone for a longer period of time. Another feature that the Magnum Wiggle Wart has is it has 2 sound chambers in it. One of them is BB loaded in the body, and the other is it has 2 small chambers in it that has steel balls in it to kind of give you the real hollow thudding sound that you really need in dingy water, in heavy cover, to attract the fish.
This is a storm rattling thin fin. It's a new bait that was just introduced recently, and it's just a super little crankbait. Its predecessor was the original thin fin. It was introduced in 1965, and it was a great bait at that time, and it has been all through the years. And what Storm has done now is taken and added rattles to it. They've increased the body size just a little bit, made it a little heavier, put a cavity inside of it with some rattles so it makes noise, and also it gives it a little more weight to throw. It makes it a little easier to throw. The original thin fin was pretty light to throw on bait casting equipment, and most of our bass fishermen these days like to throw bait casting equipment in a crankbait situation, so this bait is great for that. It's a fairly shallow running bait. Probably 5 feet or less is where I find this to be the most effective. Basically what it is just a real good shad imitation. It comes in a variety of colors. This is a shad imitation. If you look right here, this is more of a bright chartreuse with blue back, maybe some sort of a perch imitation, a little bit like a perch. And I just love to fish the bait. I typically fish the bait on a standard retrieve ratio reel. Sometimes if the fish are really aggressive and I'm having to bring the bait real fast, I'll go with a little quicker reel, but typically a 5-to-1 gear ratio. I like about a 6.5 foot medium action or medium heavy action glass rod. And I typically will throw it on anywhere from 10 to 17 pound test, depending on the cover situation. And also with that heavy line, you can hold your rod tip up and you can keep this bait up real shallow. You can keep it from running, maybe a foot to 1.5 foot deep. So by experimenting around with retrieve rate and different line sizes, you can vary the depth. The rattling fin is a floating bait. It's not a sinking bait, it's a float diving bait. It dives as you retrieve. If you'll notice, you can see that action of that bait. It really does have a good vibration to it, and then when you let up on it, it comes right back up to the top. That's one reason you can run it so shallow over shallow cover without getting hung up a lot. And it's just got that fish attracting wiggle to it. I mean, it looks like a bait fish in the water, and they really like it. You can see how that thing's wobbling there, and boy, I mean, it's a good bait. I catch lots and lots of quality bass on it. I have super success with this bait, and it really has been a winner for me, and I think you'll find that it'll be a winner for you if you'll add it into your tackle box. Thunderstick. I'm glad to see that one.
Hello folks, this is Jerry Dean. In my lifetime of fishing, I have never fished a topwater bait with more consistent results than the Storm Thunderstick. Storm's unique variation of the original stick bait design is unequaled in action. To get the best topwater bite, fish the best topwater bait. Visit your tackle dealer today for the Thunderstick. It's taking the fish by storm.
Good morning.
Howdy. You got any secret baits for catching big ones?
Yep. Have you tried these rattling thin fins from Storm Lures? They catch the big ones, and you better be ready when they start rattling.
Hey, I'll take it. Thanks. Great weight, great shape.
Whoa. Now that was a nice one.
Quality lures for taking the big ones by storm.
Confidence, you bet. Hi, I'm Ken Cook, and as you can see, I was pretty excited about winning the Bassmasters Classic, and this Storm Shortwort was a very important part of the victory. As a fisheries biologist, I know what fish like, and Storm makes a bait for every situation. Wiggle warts, thundersticks, Hottentots, and thin fins. To get my favorite crankbaits, call 1-800-96-STORM. That's toll free, 1-800-96-STORM. Quality lures that take the big ones by storm.
I'm a wiggle wart. Storm manufacturing made me so I'd wiggle. I wiggle so much that fish just keep right on biting me. My secret is I float, but I dive while I wiggle, so you can fish wiggleworts to any depth. Bass and walleye fishermen know I'm hot stuff, but now salmon, steelhead, and trout fishermen are discovering that I'm the best lure around. They think it's because we dive true, but we know it's because we wiggle so much. We wiggle up a storm.
Storm Lures specializes in deep diving lures with the action needed to catch and hold hard fighting fish. Our Hottentot is an exceptional walleye lure and bait diver for salmon and steelhead. Our family of wiggleworts, wee steely worts and magworts are great for bass and steelhead, and the new smaller size peewee wort is irresistible to trout and crappie. Plus our new crank and minnow, the DJ Thunder Stick, offers the action of a crankbait in the natural shape of a minnow. For great fishing, be sure to tie on a Storm Lure to attract that lightning strike of a trophy fish.